Beside the Brook, Chapter 14. A Serious Talk. The shepherd plodded along the orchard path to the cottage of Mr. and Mrs. Broom. The children were not in sight, but their father was busy around the beehives. Autumn had returned, and the creeper was red against the wall. The glow of nasturtiums and sunflowers against the fence added their touch of fire to the evening's gold. Boughs weighted with apples and pears brushed Teddy as he passed, and the plum tree was netted against the ravages of wasps. Mr. Broom's face and hands were netted also, for he was taking honey. There would now be more cloud than sun, so that any day the bees would start to suck their own sweets, if he did not remove their wealth and place sugar for them instead. The children were absent from the garden for a very good reason. Peggy, now grown into a tall and useful girl, was mother's valued assistant in nursing a new baby brother who had arrived in the summer holidays to everyone's delight. And John, who found it even a wrench to go to school and be away from baby Patrick, was also in close attendance, dangling a woolly ball he had made. Teddy carried carefully a home-made basket which evidently held something precious. Since last Christmas he had been a frequent visitor to the cottage, for he enjoyed the love and homeliness of the welcome he received there. Mr. and Mrs. Broom were interested, too, in his belief, not considering him odd, as others did. They also extended their welcome to Kenneth, who was always eager to discuss and explain the things nearest his heart. "Hello, Teddy!" called Mr. Broom, for he had adopted the children's method of addressing the family friend. "You don't mind waiting a few minutes, do you? I've nearly done. Don't come near. The bees get worried over strangers." Teddy sat down on the edge of the garden frame, where fat cucumbers lay about in green luxury like stranded whales. Mr. Broom closed the last hive. "Now look at this," he said, bringing up a heavy bowl of rich honeycomb. Beautifully sealed, the wax was laden. "Wonderful, wonderful," commented the old man. "The wisdom and industry of the bees is a marvel." "Do you see the various colours in the comb?" said Mr. Broom. "They show the different blossoms the bees have been working. This has been a good season for them. You must have a section or two, Teddy." "And I have at last got something free," said Teddy, indicating the basket. "I'm a wee bit tired of always receiving and never giving, so I brought along the first of my duck eggs." "Have they really begun to lay?" asked Mr. Broom, leading the way to the house. "Aye," replied Teddy. "I found the first egg last Wednesday in the brook, where the ducks go down to the water. It was not there in the morning, so she must have laid just before I got home. They're away all day." "Well, I'm glad," said Mr. Broom. "And have you had so many that you can afford to give them away so soon?" "That's no matter," replied the old man. "They've laid a lot between them since a week ago. I penned them in early, and there's been one in the run every day since." By this time they had entered the cottage. "Oh, good! Here's Teddy," said John. "Come and see baby Pat." "Yes, he's lovely," cried Peggy from father's armchair, where she was holding the little one. "He's a bonny wee thing," said the shepherd. "And what do you call him?" "Patrick, just Patrick," said John. "He's going to be christened on the 3rd Sunday in October." Teddy said nothing, but as Mrs. Broom entered the room at that moment, he offered his humble present. "Oh, Teddy, that is kind of you," said Mother, shaking his hand. "Are these your own duck eggs?" "Yes," he replied. and I'm right glad to give you something you haven't got, to try and make up for the many kindnesses you do for me." "We don't want any recompensing," protested Mrs. Broom, "but we really and shall enjoy the eggs. Hen's eggs are not the same. Thank you very much." "Where were you last Thursday evening, Teddy?" asked John. "Peggy and I tried to find you, and we waited such a long time. In the end we went to the village." "Did you want anything special?" asked the old man. "It was only that the pig was being killed," whispered Peggy, leaning towards him confidentially, so that Mother, who was busy, did not hear. "And we didn't want to stay here, so we thought we'd spend the evening with you." Teddy smiled. "It's not often I go off in the evening," he said, "but last Thursday I had the most important appointment of my life." Mother heard the remark and could not hide her curiosity. "Really, Teddy? May we ask what it was?" she asked. "I went to be baptized," he replied simply. Peggy and John were interested too. They believed that was another name for christening, and they thought it queer that an old man like Teddy should undergo what was going to happen to their newborn baby shortly. Mr. Broom had by now entered the room, so that the shepherd had a full and attentive hearing from all the family as he explained. I felt that I was ready. I'm an old man, and for a long time I've considered that my time may be short. That's why I've been so busy reading and thinking. One must understand fully before embracing the things pertaining to the kingdom in the name of Jesus. Now it has pleased God that I should be prepared, and I applied for baptism." "Where?" asked Mr. Broom. Teddy mentioned a place and a sect that he had never heard of, and Mr. Broom made a mental note. The address was a town about 14 miles away. "I had to be interviewed," went on Teddy, "and I satisfied the brethren, so that the baptism was arranged for last Thursday evening." Peggy and John were listening as eagerly as their parents. They had attended christenings round the font as part of the church Sunday school routine, and could not picture Teddy's baptism at all, so John asked, "What were you baptized in?" "I was plunged completely into a deep bath of water, John," replied the old man. "That is the only way Christ and his apostles commanded us to be baptized. Those who would belong to him must be buried in water, buried in baptism, even as he was buried. And when we rise from the waters, there is a symbolical resurrection." "But weren't you baptized as a child?" asked Mother. "No," replied Teddy. "I was christened, sprinkled with water by a parson, but now I see that that meant nothing." Mr. and Mrs. Broom were plainly disturbed. "Then you don't believe in the baptism of infants?" asked the former. "Or christening," corrected Teddy. "Sprinkling water is not baptism. No, that is no use at all. There are two conditions of baptism. There must be belief and immersion in water. A mindless babe or even a child with an undeveloped mind cannot fill the first condition, and must wait till it reaches understanding." "It is singular that you should come along with these ideas just now," observed Mr. Broom. "My wife and I have arranged with Mr. Treadgold, the clergyman, that the baby should be christened the Sunday after next." "Well, there it is," said Teddy. "Think it over before you proceed. One cannot escape the truth. Is there any record of babies being sprinkled in the New Testament? No. Only grown men and women submitted to baptism. Read about it in the Acts of the Apostles. Jesus himself went down into the Jordan to be baptized around the age of 30. Philip baptized the Ethiopian by the roadside. They both went down into the water, which shows it was deep. "We shall certainly think it over," said Mother decidedly. "I'm very glad you came along tonight, Teddy." He would not stay to supper, thinking he had said enough for one evening. Later he would tell them of his being received into fellowship, and of the joy of mixing with those of his newly found faith. When the children had gone to bed, their parents had a serious talk. "I can't help thinking there's a great deal of wisdom in all that old gentleman talks about," said Mr. Broom. "He's consistent in everything, and if the Bible is the word of God, as all Christians admit, then it is only sensible for earnest people to find out what it says for themselves, never mind the parsons." Mrs. Broom agreed. "The disturbing fact is that people blindly trust the parsons, and it seems that they are adrift somehow themselves. Is it possible that educated men, such as they are, can be mistaken?" "Well," replied Mr. Broom, whose Bible study had been neglected since boyhood, but who remembered a certain amount, "Christ chose only artisans and fishermen and such for his helpers. He did not call the educated classes. I believe that in religious matters the simple heart is the most fitting for God's service." "We ought to look into these matters," said Mrs. Broom. "If we find that Teddy is right over baptism, we'll just have to pluck up courage and go and see Mr. Treadgold. The christening can be postponed or cancelled altogether. It won't be a very pleasant job, seeing that he christened Peggy and John, and we've always attended his church." "We haven't attended very well," confessed Mr. Broom, "only on special occasions. And I'm not sure now whether I'm sorry about it or not." Beside the Brook, Chapter 15, The Hunted Fox. The shepherd's hands shook as he tended the sheep. He could not stand the winter cold this year as well as the last, for a dampness usually hung in the flat river valley that ate into his bones. This December morning, however, was frosty and bright. The breath of the sheep rose like steam in the still air, and their bleating wavered over the countryside. Everything else was still, save for the distant shouting of men preparing for a day's sport of fox hunting. Teddy was not aware of the meeting of the hounds till, resting to eat his lunch of bread and cheese about 10:30, he caught sight of the red flashes of huntsmen's coats through the brown branches of trees. "I hope they'll not come near to disturb my bairns," thought he. "Better far if Jupe would take his gun and shoot the fox if one has been worrying." Soon the baying of hounds mingled with other cries. A group of tamed forest ponies in the paddock tossed their heads and cantered to the nearest gate, whinnying, for the sound of hoofs reminded them of freedom. Young men on clumsy colts, men and women on elegant shining hunters, rallied to the meeting place, while folks pushed bicycles over the rough ground. "And all this stir to track down the life of a wee cowering fox," mused Teddy. "I wonder where he's hiding. In the big cover, maybe." No more was heard of the rally until the chase began. The master of hounds led the field through the farmyard, along Drove, and then across Pacific Ocean to the dark cover, followed by the baying hounds with noses to the ground, and a welter of riders and excited children. "As I feared," said the shepherd, seeing the effect on the flock, which scattered bleating in fright, ran a distance, and then stopped, wagging their heads in bewilderment and shaking their ears in terror. The whole wood awoke with discordant cries. Pigeons left the trees in flocks. Rooks circled, cawing loudly in the sky. The woodpecker uttered a harsh cleek, cleek. Pheasants sought safety in the boughs, from where they could not suppress their agitated coughing. Hares scuttered across the open fields, clearing ditches at a bound. Now and again the horn echoed through the trees to keep the pack together, for except in the tracks the wood was so thick with fir and rhododendron that the range of sight was short. Mr. Jupe had directed the master of hounds to the likely neighbourhood of the fox. "I reckon there be more than one up at Green End," he had said. The clamour died in the distance, and the shepherd's mind took another trend. He remembered other days when gentle deer had flashed across heathery tracks, with rolling eye and lolling tongues, pursued by hounds and men mad to kill. His heart had always been with the hunted. "Speer ye away to the burns, that the hounds may lose scent in the water," had been his wish. The words of the psalm came now to his mind, and he repeated it. "As the hart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God." He found that psalm later in the day, and, seated on a log in the sunshine, read it through. "I believe," he meditated, "that this is also the cry of one seeking deliverance as well as refreshment. The hunted beast dare not pause to drink, but plunges into the waters to frustrate its pursuers. All thy waves and thy billows are gone over me," he read on. "Yes," thought the shepherd, "the distressed may flee from trouble and seem to be overwhelmed in sorrow of another sort. But God is good. He is a rock in the midst of the waters." He remembered the proud stag he had seen once plunge the loch, threshing its way to reach a rocky islet far from its tormentors. The psalm ends on a note of hope, he discovered. "Seek him, and you will find him," was the old man's comment, "and in time you will gain relief and sanctuary." The day being Saturday, he was free in the afternoon to do his many little jobs at the shieling. There was wood to be chopped and stacked in a dry place, the duck's pen to be filled with fresh hay, pots to be scoured, and blankets to be aired in the sun. When the December afternoon was closing in, John arrived with a basket of yellow apples, and offered to fetch Teddy's milk from the farm. "That will be a help to me, laddie," said the shepherd. "Even so, I shall only be just about finished when it is time to light the lamp." The boy had scarcely disappeared when the hunter's horn sounded at the end of the copse, and an outburst of shouting brought to mind the disturbance of the morning. "Surely they should be all the way home by now," said Teddy, going to the door and looking in the direction of the noise. At first he thought it was a brown dog rushing through the undergrowth on the other side of the brook. But when he saw the pointed nose, the black-tipped ears, and the bushy tail extended in flight, he recognized the poor hunted fox. The distraught animal, panting with exhaustion, turned suddenly toward the brook, attracted by the clearing in the bushes where the shieling stood. Down the bank it plunged without pausing, splashed into the water, up the other side, and cowered below the hut. In a moment Teddy was down the steps on his knees and feeling under the wheels. The fox was too exhausted to run further. It would move for nothing but the dogs, and perhaps not for them. The old man grabbed it by the hind legs, then felt a burning pain in his left forearm, and when he dragged the wretched creature out, found a wound in his arm bleeding profusely. The fox in its terror had bitten its captor, and now glared at him with fiery, glowing eyes. "Dinna bite your friend," said Teddy, seizing its body and thrusting it through the open door of the shieling, just as the first couple of hounds appeared. The shepherd's action had not occupied many seconds, and now he was up the steps himself, with the door closed to intruders. From the small window he saw the dogs run down the bank, heard them splash through the brook, and then lope around the hut. "They've lost the scent," he chuckled. After wandering to and fro with noses to the ground, the hounds splashed back and re-entered the wood. The hunter's horn was heard calling off the pursuit, and soon the baying and shouting died. John arrived at that moment with the milk can. "I hurried to see the hounds again," he said, "but I tried not to spill the milk." A few telltale drops trickled down the can. "You're a good lad, John," said the shepherd. "Thank ye." "Oh, what's the matter with your arm?" cried the boy. "It's bleeding." "Oh, nothing at all," said Teddy carelessly. "Would you like to see something?" "Oh, yes," exclaimed the lad. "Come up behind me, but don't get too near." John entered the hut on tiptoe with excitement. He could hear the noise of licking. It was dark inside, and Teddy held the lad back with one hand, while pointing under the bunk with the other. The licking stopped, and two glowing eyes directed their gaze towards the man and boy. "Whatever is it?" asked John. "It's the fox," said Teddy, "saved from the dogs." "Oh, I'm glad," cried John. "I love seeing the hut, but I didn't want the dogs to catch him." The beast still cowered with head cringing, and watched Teddy light the little oil lamp. John was too excited to speak aloud. "Are you going to let it go, Teddy?" he whispered. "Aye, I'll let it go a wee while longer, and it'll be safe to send it off." The fox's rich brown fur shone in the dim lamplight, and an unpleasant odour filled the hut. Blood trickled from its ear and shoulder. "The poor beast has been torn by thorns in the chase," said the shepherd. "It looks as if you have too," said John. "Oh, never mind that," said Teddy. "I'll put iodine on it, and that will be all right." "Mr. Duke will be sorry the fox has escaped," observed John. "Aye, maybe he will," replied the old man. "But he can put a shot in it at any time. It's a more merciful end than being torn to pieces by dogs." "Let me watch you set it free," pleaded the boy. "All right," said Teddy. "We'll clear out ourselves and give it the chance to be off." They went down the steps, and Teddy made sure that the duck pen was securely fastened. Then they waited, their eyes fixed on the open door of the shieling. Presently, against the background of lamplight, the outline of the fox appeared in the doorway. It peered furtively about, then, lowering its pointed nose to the steps, it ran down swiftly and noiselessly into the growing shadows. An uneasy quack issued from the duck pen. "Nothing for you to bother about," Teddy assured the ducks, as John ran off home.